June 11th, 1997. Don't know what happened that day in college football, but that's the day MJ dropped like 38, I think, on Utah in the NBA Finals, despite the fact that he had the flu. That was then. Now, tonight on this show, I don't know what's going to happen, but it has taken copious amounts of all kinds of substances to be able to get me on the show. Jesse and Colin know what I'm on. The FDA does not know what I'm on. But we cannot take a day off because we got too much to talk about. The show's jam-packed. We're high atop a suddenly sunny downtown Nashville, Tennessee. It's crazy what happens when you spring forward an hour. I may end up campaigning on this. If this show ever goes political, it'll be purely for the storm-chasing bill in Oklahoma and to make whatever daylight savings or standard time this is permanent. My rivalry with some internet-bound Clemson folks has escalated today. I will talk about it as their recruiting has escalated. I had a question about the health of the sport, that sport being college football. I did want to address that. We've got a ton of spring questions tonight, and they're kind of spring questions, but really they're just questions in general. Because does anyone know, really, what Utah will look like this year? They were bad last year for the first time ever. Such a testament to Kyle Whittingham that, like, they don't ever recruit in the top 10, and yet they're always there, and suddenly they weren't. That's just a random question. I got like 20 of them. I've got mystery teams. We got a ton to get to tonight, and we will do it in about as timely a manner as we can. They're watching us in Villa Rica, Georgia, Suffield, Connecticut, Pleasant Grove, Utah, and, listen to me carefully, Killeen, Texas. Yes. Am I perfect? No. Do I stumble on a town's pronunciation every now and then? Yes. Am I apologizing? Not necessarily. But Killeen, Texas is no more. Killeen, Texas is here to stay. I'm probably storm chasing later this week. I'm just going to let a bunch of you know. We'll probably have a Tuesday show because I may have to be on the road later this week. For those of you who are new to the show, yeah, you heard me right. I cover college football because I love it. But the other reason I cover college football as a job is because it perfectly frees up my spring where I can be maneuverable enough to go storm chasing because my second passion is atmospheric science. So if you don't already follow me on the socials at Josh Pate CFB, yeah, the CFB stands for college football, but you might get a little bonus tornadic content later this week because I'm telling you, the signifiers are there. We're 6 days out still, but I think the back half of this week could be very explosive. In the meantime, for the 99% of you who are here to listen to college football talk, let's dive into the show tonight, shall we? We had a question. We kind of get this one a lot. I figured this is the kind of show, we don't really have huge breaking news, so let's throw it at the front of the show. And it came to us from Sam. So Sam's down in Atlanta. He said, with how things are shaping up in college football, how healthy do you think the sport is right now with these constant changes? Good question. All right, so it's very funny to listen to different people in our space or just college football fans in general talk about their opinion on this. Because I've heard some people say the sport is screwed, it's just done for. I've heard other people, like I've heard Joel Klatt say, this is the beginning of the golden age of college football. Now, I'm not sure I feel either. I think you can't deny that the sport is doing healthy in terms of engagement, viewership, attendance numbers. Attendance, when it declines, especially in a hyper-technological age, is sort of misconstrued. Like if your attendance figures go down, but the rapid advancement in technology makes the home experience so great, it's not really an indicator that the sport's health is suffering as much as people would lead you to believe. So those kinds of indicators would tell me, oh, the sport's great, the sport's flourishing. Okay, and then you have the added component of playoff expansion. We've all got our feelings on that. I've made mine well known. But bottom line is, a lot of people who would view this as a golden era, they would say more playoff spots means more competition for a playoff spot, which means more access points, which means more engaged fan bases, deeper in the season. That's a net positive for the sport. I've got my own philosophy on that, but a lot of people feel that way. So, okay, I'll grant you that. They would also say that because of NIL and the coming revenue-sharing era, it's impossible for a few programs to hoard all the talent, and that means that the competitive balance of the sport has evened out, sort of the flattening of the sport. Somewhat agree with that. Long term, I don't know if that's the way it will remain. But anyway, There are other components that people complain about. And I get some of the positives. I think there's some negatives. But here's what I always come back to, Sam, and I'll talk to anybody about this. I'm always happy to talk about this. Anytime we do our tours in the fall and I go speak to a college class, one of the first questions we always get will be from like a 19-year-old sophomore, and he'll say, or she'll say, like, where do you think the sport is? Where do you think it's headed? And it's always like this doom and gloom, sort of somber tone. You can tell, like, the question is sort of layered in negativity. But I don't think you have to be negative about the health of the sport, even if you don't like particularly a lot of the facets about it now. I don't like a lot of the stuff about the sport right now, but I love the sport. So here's what I always go back to. This is my barometer. My barometer for the health of college football has been and always will be one question: is Saturday still Saturday? And my answer to that is yes. And as long as Saturdays in the fall are still Saturdays in the fall, as long as the meaning of that is still encapsulated the way it should be, as long as it's pristine as it always has been in my mind and in my experience, then I'm okay with saying the health of the sport is fine, even if I don't approve of everything happening in the sport. So here's what I mean by Saturdays in the fall. I mean, when I went up to Eugene, Oregon this past year, and I was standing on that sideline in the middle of the third quarter, and Ohio State and Oregon are trading haymakers, that's as good as it gets. Nothing about the changes that are orbiting around Saturdays in the fall affected that. I'm down in Tuscaloosa. Georgia's in town. Bama goes up like 30-7 or something like that. Georgia comes all the way back. Then the Ryan Williams touchdown, and place is just insane, above and beyond the atmosphere you would ever get at any playoff game, any national championship game. That's Saturday in the fall. I was out in Tempe, Arizona. Brigham Young was in town at Arizona State. Four-quarter classic. They stormed the field. That is Saturday in the fall. And that stuff this past year felt as good and as authentic and pristine as it's ever felt to me. Do I love everything happening? Of course I don't. There's never been a point in my lifetime where I've looked at college football across the board and said, I love everything that's going on right now. I think that's an illusion. That's a myth. I don't think we ever get there. But I will say this. With a lot of the sort of seismic change that's happening right now, we're in the middle of it. Keep in mind, we're in the middle of it. It's kind of hard when you look in your history books and you look back at westward expansion, or you look at any of a number of other things that were chapters in your history books, but it's already done, and you know the beginning, the middle, and the ending. It's easy to see it in totality. You can't see what's happening right now in totality because it's still happening. We're right in the middle of the story being written. But eventually, college football, through all of this change over the past decade or so, will get to somewhat of a steady shore. A lot has happened. A lot is in the process of happening. I continue to maintain we've got a shot to stick the landing here. Not that things are dire right now, but I'm saying for those of you who may be a little perturbed, a little miffed, a little upset with where college football is, which is not all of you, but some of you feel that way, I will give you a ton of hope. If you think about this, think about where we could be headed. You don't like a ton of players moving around in the portal right now. You don't like NIL ruling everything, if that fits the description of how you feel. Well, think about what the revenue sharing era could mean. If you have a new enforcement body, if you have a new set of laws that govern the sport and they're enforceable, this is all written in pencil right now. A lot of it's pinned up in courts, but if we get to that place, I got to think that roster continuity reverts back to looking a lot more like what it looked before the portal era went crazy than it does right now. I've got to think the revenue sharing era kind of accomplishes both things. It places a premium on evaluation and development of talent in-house. It also does divide the talent up to where you have a more competitive, balanced playing field. But then also, okay, remember one more thing down. The playoff structure. Think what you will about college football playoff expansion. I wasn't a huge fan of it. I still am not. But given that we're headed there, I've been on record as saying if we're going to a 14-team model, I'm actually opposed to how most people who share my sentiment feel. Most people who I usually agree with are looking at the new playoff model saying, I don't want any auto bids. That's crap. I don't want any of that. Well, I look at it and say, I never wanted any of it, period. But if we're going to have it, give me the auto bid structure, which sounds counterintuitive to everything else I've ever said on this show. But think about that for a second. If I'm someone who grew up on conference championship races and there being a premium on conference championships and conference games, well, the way to best crystallize that is to go into the season where you got 14 teams who are going to make the playoff, and the SEC knows they're getting 4, and the Big Ten knows they're getting 4. And maybe some years that makes sense in the grand scheme of things, maybe it doesn't. But I'll tell you what it does is it places a premium focus on those leagues' championship races, those leagues' conference races. So if I get a lot of that plopped into my lap over the next few years, Sam, I would call the sport, if we thread the needle there, pretty darn healthy. And it's already pretty healthy. Not perfect, but it's pretty healthy. Academy Sports and Outdoors, always a healthy option. Always, not necessarily that they're, serving vegan lunches over there or anything, but a healthy option if you need to gear up, a healthy option if you need one of those very, very coveted Academy Sports and Outdoors fold-out chairs this time of year. I know where you were yesterday. If you're a mother, if you're a father, if the little ones are active in rec ball or any kind of spring sports, you see those chairs. Why don't you have one? Why don't you have 5? You could even go a step further and get the whole Academy tent, the canopy, whatever they call those things. They dot the landscape of Pate Park in Harris County, Georgia. Famously not named after me, unfortunately. Academy Sports and Outdoors, academy.com. They are the presenting partner of this show. They make sure the show stays free. We appreciate them then, now, and forever. And they are your hookup. You need fishing equipment. You need baseball equipment. You need big league chew. They've got it all. That might as well be on their banner. Let's move along. Yeah, let's move along indeed. So, I got great news. I've got tragic news. You got to deal with both here. The great news is, paper pop, Clemson has landed several big-time verbal commits this past weekend. The tragic news is certain portions of Clemson internet culture have lost their collective minds. So, sometimes on this show, I have been accused of being unclear, speaking in vague terms, so I can circle back and deny that I said something, which I absolutely do. However, in this case, I'm not guilty of it. This is definitely not a situation, contrary to what the internet will tell you in some circles, that I've been unclear about things. And the way I know that is because I've had a feeling about Clemson for about 3 years now. I've been vocal about it for about a year and a half. So I don't need you to take my word for it. In just a second, I'll have Director Colin do what we call presenting evidence, which is where I claim I said something, then I play myself saying it. Or on the flip side, if you claim I said something, you could also present that same evidence. And there's a lot of that circulating. I'll address all of this. But here's the good news. Clemson made some noise in recruiting this weekend. So what happens when Clemson now lands some kids in recruiting is not only do they land them, I go and look for updates, and I see my name plastered all over the place with people calling me out. What do you have to say now? Boy, where's Josh Pate now? I'm right here. What are you talking about? Well, you're going to backtrack? What do I need to backtrack on? You said Clemson was finished. I never did. So, Colin, the day after National Signing Day, when they had landed a class outside the top 25, albeit it was a smaller class, so even if we factor that in and go by average player grade, they were in the mid-teens. I said some things about Clemson. You don't need to take my word for it. Well, you do, but you need to hear my actual words I said. Mind you, this is like 2 months ago, month and a half ago. Let's roll it. This is 3 straight cycles. Clemson's recruiting is finished outside the top 10. This one finished outside the top 25. It's not a fringe issue. They're not close. Let me put it plainly. Clemson's football players that they are accumulating on that roster are not going to be good enough to meet the standard they've set there. Unless something drastic changes or unless their development laps the rest of the sport or the recruiting rankings were just totally flawed. Unless something like that is amiss, they're not going to be able to keep up. This year's team will actually be their best shot over the next several years. That's the way it looks to me right now. So that's the way it looked. And now Clemson's landed a few big-time kids. So my consistent feel, which hasn't changed on Clemson, is it's the top program in the ACC. Recruiting has regressed. The overall product on the field has regressed. The talent roster has regressed. The current mode that they find themselves in is incapable of matching the standard they set for themselves in the mid to late 20-teens. That's how I felt about Clemson. It's still how I feel about Clemson. Up until this moment, it's still how I feel about them. So what we just said there is not they're terrible, they suck, they're falling into the abyss. It's they were on rung 10 of college football's ladder. They're on about rung 7 right now. And if they maintain this pace, they won't fall below 6, but they will not elevate back up to 10. Or, put a different way, it's going to take something above and beyond what they're doing right now. So we got a nice, solid blip on the recruiting radar screen this past weekend. Not a slam dunk, not definitive proof of anything, but it's good. So there's no denying that. It's good, especially at the receiver position. It's good. But I know how this works. It works the same way every time. Weirdly, it's this way with Clemson more so than other programs. I don't know what that is. But what happens is most people who start criticizing me on this front don't watch this show. So they see someone over on like TigerNet or someone like that claim I said something, which in and of itself is a lie, and then they believe it and they run with it, and then they have this entire like misconception in their mind about what was said. The folks who watch the show are normally the ones who come in the replies and say, yeah, it's actually not what he said. So I get it. I get that there's a little minority on the internet that always does that. But to be very clear, after the Louisville game this past year, we went on the show. I think I spoke about as directly about the state of Clemson football as I had in quite a while. Because I'm normally not negative towards these folks, just not. I like it to be a last resort. But Louisville went in there and just owned them. And I thought it did some pretty irreversible damage. And I went back and watched that clip today because a lot of you threw it at me. Even the way I felt the day after that game was the scene was pretty shocking. If you really think about that, a road team in Clemson Stadium having the game in hand was a very weird feeling to me. And I remember the feedback I got after that segment. You'll not believe this. The feedback I got from Clemson folks was overwhelming support for having said it. Now, I looked in my DMs today, just out of curiosity, and some of the people who trashed me today, if you scrolled up and looked at their message history, were the ones who were backslapping me and high-fiving me when I said what I said after the Louisville game. It's just funny how that works. So I feel the same way. It takes more than a good recruiting weekend to reverse that. This was good, but it's always been layered for me with Clemson. Dabo has built something there that is such that it's never going to fall off a cliff. They're never going to torpedo into the mountainside. It's just that the standard was a national championship. It was them in Alabama. That's what it was in the mid-20 teens. So to ever get back there, that roster has to look the way it did. Maybe this is the first step towards getting there. This year's team, I think, is going to be good. I've said that every step of the way. This year's team should be the favorite to win the ACC. It's beyond 2025. That's when I wonder the most. That's when I have the most doubt. Love the vibe, though. I think he's hired really well. Dabo is who I'm talking about. I think he's hired very aggressively. This is a good sign. It's a good sign. I'm not going to get carried away with it. It's a good sign. That's where I am with Clemson right now. Let's move it merrily along. I'm sure that fell well beneath the standard of satisfying certain people, but that's okay. I will always get criticism for doing segments like that. I know that some of our longtime listeners get mad when I address people who come after the show on different social platforms. I just don't mind doing it. I don't mind doing it because I have fun with it. It's March. It's March 9th. We don't have 5 games to react to. So if some Clemson people talked a little trash on Twitter, that's okay. We'll have fun with it. I didn't even block them. I'm not Brandon Walker. I'm not Savage. So it's fun. It's all fun. But I will tell you this. I would prefer a nice hearty sip of Zevia after that. Cream soda? Of course, cream soda. And 0 sugar while I'm at it. Appreciate Zevia. It is spring after all. If it's not on the calendar, it is outside. We got low 70s this week in Nashville. Buckle up, baby. How about some good, hearty spring football questions? And I'm starting in Georgia because Georgia disappointed me mightily last year. And I'm going to read you, you know what, this is worth a paper pop. Paper pop of a stat here. Georgia football, 102nd in rush yards per game last year. Still can't believe it. That's the worst they've been this century. And now they lost 4 offensive line starters. They probably don't have an elite arm at quarterback. Probably don't. So I'm trying to think to myself, a lot of them are piling on Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator. What is the identity of the Georgia offense? I've been able to say that forever. As long as Kirby's been there, I've just blindly been able to assume the identity will work off of a dominant ground game, and then it'll be to varying degrees what can we get from the passing game. And it just wasn't that last year. And you know what's crazy? They still won the SEC. And shame on the rest of you for letting it happen. They still won the SEC. Identity on offense. Looking for that. That's a huge question. What about Oklahoma? So at Oklahoma, not a memorable season last year, very forgettable season. They went and got a kid by the name of John Mateer out of the transfer portal at quarterback. I'll call him one of the most important players in college football this year because this Oklahoma roster is far more ready-made to win than most people realize. It's just that they were such a disaster offensively last year. Offensive line, a lot of shuffling last year. That could pay dividends this year. I have no doubt they'll be solidly a top 20, maybe a top 15 or 10 kind of unit defensively. That kid's ceiling, John Mateer's ceiling, he comes over with his offensive coordinator, by the way. Very high ceiling. Now, there's a low floor, so there's bust potential. But if they get it figured out, they got the toughest schedule in the country, I think. But they get it figured out, and you'll start to get a feel for that in spring. That could be a really, really good team. Oklahoma can be really good this year. They got the talent roster to be that. Alabama, they return very little in proven defensive pressure guys. So they got some former 4- and 5-star guys there. Yanze Pierre is just a name that comes to mind. Keon Keeley's a name that comes to mind. Guys, if you follow recruiting, you probably remember, but not a ton of proven production there as of yet. But that's what college football is all about. Guys who you remember from recruiting, and then you started to scratch your chin and say, whoa, what happened to them? And then as a junior, they just explode. Well, they need that to happen because Will Anderson and Dallas Turner and now Jahad Campbell, Q Robinson, those guys aren't there anymore. Which quarterback obviously fits the system best? That's an obvious. That's something everyone's going to be following there. And also, I'm not sure how far we go in learning about this in spring, but this was a team that was 123rd in penalties last year, and they were 97th in turnovers committed. And I had producer Jesse go back and run the numbers. We're good, Colin. That doesn't really bode well if you're trying to win a conference championship. Tennessee, very simple here. Very simple. The evolution of Nico Iamaleava at quarterback. This is one of those conversations you used to not have, but you have it now. And it sounds like this. We've invested a lot of money in this kid. We've got to get better production out of him. In reality, I think you and I both know you're capable of what you're capable of. But if you pay someone a lot of money, sort of the societal expectation is you've got to produce in direct correlation with what we pay you. Which means if you paid me 5 times what I get paid right now, I should do 5 times the show I do right now, right? No, I'm doing the best I can right now. It doesn't matter how much more you pay me. I wouldn't turn it down. But it's unrealistic to expect 5 times the performance level. Well, I'm not saying it's quite that crazy at Tennessee, But they do need to get better. They were 77th in pass yards per game last year. He got held under 200 yards in 8 of 13 games they played. And that offensive line's losing, it's over 160 starts combined that offensive line loses. So very important spring at Tennessee. South Carolina, that's another one. Lenora Sellers popped on the scene last year. South Carolina right on the border of being a playoff team. So I think the preview magazine culture would lead you to believe that Lenora Sellers became a household name last year. South Carolina almost made the playoff. Now he's back. They'll take the next step. Just kind of the tumblers all fall into place. That's not how sports work. It's not how college football works. It's not how life works. So I'll grant you, Sellers is a special player. And I've got no problem believing in the energy and the buy-in and all that from South Carolina's program. But they return about 50% of their production on defense. So that's the first thing I'd be watching around there this spring. And then the second thing is Nick Harbor a legitimate wide receiver one in the SEC? And what kind of depth do they have beyond him at wide receiver? Just a couple of things I'm watching in Columbia. Texas. Line of scrimmage, man. 4 offensive line starters with 40-plus starts are gone, but they recruit very well. Defensive line lost 4 contributors. They're gone, but they recruit very well. You obviously got the Arch Manning thing, but what kind of stress does being unproven on the line of scrimmage put on the quarterback position, and what kind of stress does it put on the secondary? Those are things that you start to watch as much as you can in spring. They are watching us. I take a quick time out to tell you they're watching us in Lawton, Oklahoma, St. Louis, Missouri, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We appreciate it as always. Take a quick sip of water. I think we got time for that. I'm telling you, all kind of protocols are in place with Director Colin if I do need to sort of just dump out for a second and clear the throat and blow the nose. But so far, so good, Colin. It's a solid wood desk that I'm knocking on. But we continue. Spring questions, you know what that means. That means spring intel is coming next week. And that's next to fall camp intel. That's some of the funnest segments we do all year. Okay. More spring questions here. Penn State, most obvious question in the world. What are you going to be at wide receiver? What is this, a segment from the last 5 years? Yeah, pretty much. So elsewhere, I'm good. If I'm Penn State, I got 4 or 5 offensive linemen returning. I got 2 top 10 tailbacks returning. I'm gonna be good where I'm normally good. I'm losing Tyler Warren, but in the net, I'm gonna be okay, I think. Except that the last 2 seasons, at the end of the season, I've lost my top wide receiver to the portal, and I just did again. I don't know what the post-spring portal window is going to look like, but they have got to be in there. They have to be the shark fin in there, looking for receivers. Wisconsin, I hadn't talked about them in a second, but they've tried to go quarterback in the portal a couple of times, and it just has not worked. Tanner Mordecai, not really. Tyler Van Dyke got hurt early last year. Now they're going for it again. Billy Edwards, for those of you not keeping track, he's from Maryland. He's 6'4", he's 220. He started 14 games during 3 seasons at Maryland. Where are they going? I did not expect to be asking this question in year 3 under Luke Fickell. I was very excited when they hired him. I haven't sold all my stock or anything, but I kind of feel about Fickell like I did, but in an opposite way about Lincoln Riley. I thought when Riley got to USC, maybe at the outset he hired the wrong guys defensively. Maybe Fickell went the wrong direction offensively. I don't know if he'd agree with that, but it just kind of feels that way from the outside. So where are they going? Ohio State, kind of a similar vibe to Texas here. They replace so much on that defensive line, but they've got guys there. It's always going to be the follow-up with programs like that. Edric Houston, he's there. Kenyatta Jackson, he's there. Just because they hadn't put up All-American stats doesn't mean they can't. It's because there have been studs in front of them, so they hadn't been pressed into duty yet. The offensive line's interesting, too, so they got 4 starters gone there. You always get benefit of the doubt because you're Ohio State. You get benefit of the doubt because you're Texas. Ironically, look who they play in week 1. And that's not a preseason game, kids. We don't have that in college football. Texas in Columbus, Ohio for week 1. What about the University of Iowa? Quarterback this year, does anyone know? Does anyone know? Does anyone know who transferred from South Dakota State to Iowa? Actually, knowing our audience, several of you probably know. Mark Gronowski, what do we expect there? And no matter who it is, okay, he's played for a while. He was at South Dakota State. I know good and well you didn't watch him last year. I didn't either. Same question every year in spring for Iowa. Is there a chance that we get incrementally better offensively? Because I know what we have on the other side. So are we going to be Iowa again, or are we going to be Iowa with the offense turned up a little bit? That's what gets us to Indianapolis. Michigan, obviously. The quarterback position, you got Mikey Keene there. So the floor's fairly high, but the ceiling being as tall as it is because you've got Bryce Underwood, number 1 player in the country, true freshman. All of that will be talked about from now until week 1 and beyond. But they're replacing a lot of defensive line production. Had no real production at wide receiver last year. So that's a couple of the things that I'll watch at Michigan. That quarterback thing, that's going to be one of the stories of college football. And at Oregon, you know how for a long time with the power programs out there, you've gotten yourself into the habit of saying, oh, they don't rebuild, they just reload. Is Oregon there? They think they are. I kind of think they are. This is where we're going to start to find out. They are not in the top 100s in returning production on either offense or defense. But they got players all over the place, just kind of unproven. Dante Moore, starting at quarterback for him. I think a lot of him. I think a lot of his potential. There are a lot of names that I think a lot of. They just have to prove it there. Oregon's kind of worked themselves into the spot where they get benefit of the doubt from me on this. But that's kind of it's kind of in totality the question I'm asking about them. You know, are they like closer to a team that fluctuates wildly, or is it going to be more like a Georgia or more like an Ohio State, more like a Bama under Saban, where even though you didn't know the names in spring, you just kind of knew they're good for 10 wins plus? Is that Oregon? I think it is, but we're going to start to find out. Quick Trip, you want to find out about life, about how to fuel yourself in every way possible, stop by Quick Trip, exclusive fuel provider of the show. Been fueling us all spring. We were in Texas last week. Who knows where we'll be this week, storm chasing. Towards the end of the week, could be in multiple states, or STI, the plural of states. So, I see a lot of Quick Trip in our future, and we're happy to have them aboard. Thank you, Quick Trip. Let's move along. Mystery. I'm going to do it again for you, Colin. Here we go. Mystery, intrigue. Which teams am I describing this year? I think I'm describing Texas A&M. That's one of the most mysterious teams in college football this year. Offensive line, returning production there. It looks good. I was in their building last week. Colin Klein's the offensive coordinator there. So he walks by, talked to him for a little while. I said, man, a lot of guys have played a lot of football on offensive line for you, haven't they? He said, man, you have no clue how much more clearly those lines on those plays you draw up, how much better and more crisp they look when you got a solid offensive line to make it happen. They got healthy running backs. You remember Le'Veon Moss? Yeah, Reuben Owens. You remember those guys? They're still there and healthy, presumably. If Marcel Reed at the quarterback position, if he even just does an average elevation job in terms of development, could be a good team. They're set up for success offensively. Really good upside there. It's just, what do you have defensively? And then also still feels like the program is settling in under Mike Elko. So like, is year 2 the year that happens? Is year 3 the year that happens? Does it happen? That's a mystery team. That's why they're in the segment right now. Utah, I mentioned this at the beginning. It's a paper thump. Utah went 5-7 last year. That's the first losing season they've had since 2013. Kyle Whittingham is so good. When you are in the situation they are, which is they don't recruit at a high level, They go after a different kind of kid. They trust their eval and development so much that they don't even bother really going after 4- and 5-star guys. They get a few of them, but they're not a top 20, top 25 recruiting program. That should mean every now and then you have a down year. They haven't. Just remarkable. So they finally did last year. 72% of their offensive production returns. I'm not sure what quarterback looks like there right now, but they had shake up at the offensive coordinator spot. There's a large part of me that's just screaming, hey, man, Whittingham's not going to have that team perform that way 2 years in a row. 2, 4, 6, they are 8th. Well, tied for 7th, I guess, in the odds to win the Big 12 championship, which kind of means nothing because teams routinely win the thing from outside the top 10. Michigan State? I mean, question. Here's a good question. It's open-ended. What has Jonathan Smith been up to? What's happening in East Lansing? Like, has anyone heard lately? Heavy portal team. They leaned heavily on the portal. Nick Marsh is a really good wide receiver. One, Aiden Childs just gotta have at the quarterback position A- or better elevation last year to this year. Gotta have it. That's a non-starter. If we get it, then who knows? They play Oregon and Ohio State. Well, they played them last year, and neither game was close. This year, the first time you watch them will be at USC, which is week 4, making sure there's no bye week in there. But there's no Ohio State on that schedule. There's no Oregon on that schedule. They do get Michigan and Penn State, but they get them both at home. Who knows? That's the old year 1 to year 2 as well. And one more I wanted to talk to you about. I'm going to play some sound for you in a second. SMU, I was out there last week. I want you to think about something. So this will heavily depend on how old you are. If you're 64 and I mention SMU, you think death penalty. If you're like 37 and I mention SMU, you think 30 for 30 documentary about the death penalty. But if you're 18 or 19 years old, you don't really know that. You didn't really come from either of those eras. Consider for a second, if you're 64 or you're 37, think about what an 18-year-old's idea of SMU is right now. So I was in Dallas last week, and Colin's about to play for you a clip. The entire interview is on our channel right now. Really, really good. I'm telling you, I don't care if you're an SMU fan or not. You ought to go listen to this. Here's a small bit of it, and here's Rhett Lashlee kind of alluding to and talking about what I just mentioned.
SMU, for your dad's and your granddad's generation, is in a place that probably they told you they'd never be again. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, the playoff game, you make it, you lose, it's one and done. But at the same time, you ever just stop to think about where this program is now and how, impossible that would have seemed 1, 2, 3 decades ago?
Yeah, it's hard to put into words. I'm getting chills hearing you say all that. Just because I know how big this year was to so many generations of fans here at SMU, so many people that never thought they'd see that day again. When that story happened, that's what's been talked about for 30 or 40 years. And that's kind of defined our program. We lost a generation of fans because of it, literally, because there wasn't a program for 2 years, and then for 2 decades it was 1 and 2 wins every year. You're not going to really solicit a lot of fans when you're not winning. And so to have ourselves now where it's cool to go to SMU and we're filling the stadium and the city of Dallas is embracing us, and then to go out and kind of validate that by what we did in our first year in the ACC and making the playoff, to me it closes that chapter on SMU's history.
So last year they played for the conference championship, came close to winning the conference championship. Natural question, what's the follow-up? Kevin Jennings back at quarterback, good team, good players in the building. Everything there leveled up. Like when they went to the ACC, all the infrastructure leveled up. All the people that had to be on board are on board. It was good seeing that last week. Just a mystery, strictly because there's a lot of down from last year, and you can't go much higher than they got last year. And that'll be a really, really fun trip when they go to Clemson this year. October 18th, they got Miami at home. They got Louisville at home. So another really, really interesting team there. 43rd, we've got them in strength of schedule right now. They've got the 4th best odds to win the ACC over at FanDuel. Speaking of which, that's the exclusive odds provider of the show, obviously. And you may be thinking, if you don't know much about betting, you don't follow that, that's okay. Plenty of room for you on this show, I promise you that. But you may be thinking to yourself, well, those odds he's showing there, what are those from? They're from FanDuel. But yeah, the season, though, it's March. So you got April, May, June, July, August. Those games are like over 5 months away. I know. But you can bet on it now. What? Like real money? Yes, you can. Now, you have to wait a while for it to cash one way or the other, but you can bet that stuff right now. It's over at FanDuel. We were just showing you the ACC. SEC's over there, Big 12, Big 10. You got season win totals. You got all that good stuff. There's some games already up. So, at the very least, even if you don't bet, and if you're on the fence about it, maybe don't do it right now. Just be smart about it. But even if you're on the fence about it, or you have never bet a cent in your life, if you're just curious what the numbers are right now, there's no cost to peruse over there. You can go look. We appreciate FanDuel, though. They provide us with those numbers and much more in the season, as you guys found out last year. One more thing I wanted to hit tonight. It was a question about another guy we sat down with recently. So, question from our good buddy Turd Ferguson hit us up. Beautiful name. Biblical name? I'm not sure, but a beautiful name nonetheless. He said, does Nebraska break their ceiling from last year and go at least 8-4? So here's what Matt Rule has done his first 2 years. He went 5-7, and last year they went 7-6. The win total this year is 7.5. Okay, so you're asking exactly what our friends at FanDuel are asking. Are they going to hit the over or not? Now, once upon a time, this question would have been insulting for Nebraska, but it's been a while. Do you realize last year was the first year they even got to practice for a bowl game in like almost a decade, which is just wild to think about. So I think it's safe to assume this. I'm not ready to bet it. I think it's safe to assume it's a respectable expectation. Let me put it that way. Because it's Matt Rule's track record. People are polarized on Matt Rule. Some folks love him. Some folks can't stand him. I've got no problem with him. But I asked him about this last couple weeks ago, I think it was, when we had him on the show. And he made special mention of this. Like he's very, very keenly aware. It's not year one where I do it. It may not even be year two. But as Director Colin will play for you here, year 3 it could happen.
You guys had not even had bowl practices or had a bowl game since, 2016? Yeah. Up until last year. So you make a bowl last year. That used to be cause for minor celebration. And now it's Nebraska. Were they in the playoff? No? All right, next.
Yeah, we're proud of what we did. It's a good first step. You look at my history, it's always year 3, year 4 that we're successful. So I'm not really hey, come and win right away type of a guy. I'm kind of build it this way, and I think we're building it that way, though.
So he's not just saying that. You go and look what he did at Temple. It's there, year 3. Baylor, it's there, year 3. Now, that doesn't guarantee anything this year. Those defensive staff losses are going to be tough to replace, but in the overall aggregate, a word I'm trying to use less, failing, but trying, Dana Holgorsen paired up with Dylan Raiola. I think the overall output of that team, defense, offense, special teams, if you roll all of it into a ball, even with the losses on that defensive staff, I think the net could be that we get a better product on the field this year. And if that quarterback situation, if Dylan Raiola does even a fraction of what the guy he emulates every Sunday does there in Kansas City, then look at their schedule. We've got it rated 14th out of 18 teams in terms of strength of schedule in the Big Ten. It's very workable. There's no Ohio State on that schedule. There's Michigan at home early in the year. Has Michigan figured out quarterback there yet? Don't know. They get Michigan State at home after a bye week. So they don't go to Oregon. There's no Oregon on the schedule. I think 8's fair. I think the expectation of 8 or better is fair this year. I think going by Matt Rule's track record, that's fair this year. If I were living up in North Platte or anywhere in Nebraska, take your pick. I always go to North Platte for some reason. and you're saying, we ought to win 8 or more this year, I agree with you. It's a little shorter show tonight, but that's only because I've been largely high on cold medication. I have no clue what I just said for the past 45 minutes. I hope it made sense. If it did, Director Colin will cut it up. We'll put it on the YouTube channel. If not, I want you to disappear this memory from your mind. We'll be back probably Tuesday. Stay tuned because I think got a lot of storm chasing coming later in the week. I'll probably be out of town, so we need to do our week show on Tuesday. So I will let you know probably within the next 24 or so hours. Until then, for Director Colin, for Producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to your week, and God bless.